And you should have been notified.
Yes, I got it.
Okay. All right. And like they do in the TV, 3. Good day, everybody, and welcome back to the NASTD IT 101 series. My name is Brad Steele, and I'm the Senior Director of Unified Communications at the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and I'm an NASTD past president. NASTD is the National Association of State Technology Directors and is made up of technology professionals serving state government. It is a member-driven organization whose purpose is to advance and promote the effective use of information technology and services to improve the operation of state government. Article 1, Section 2, under Purpose and Goals of the NASTD Constitution, lists the second goal as engage in programs for the training, education, and development of technology professionals from all areas of state government. To accomplish this goal, we decided to put together a set of educational videos we call IT 101 sessions to help with this education. In these videos, we are asking industry leaders from our corporate affiliate community 10 or so standard questions about the technology or service in question. And we like to choose either new or what I like to call understood technologies, things that we could use a little bit more about. We hear the keywords, but let's get into the details and get a definition around it. If you haven't seen the videos that we have put together in the past, I ask that you refer to the NASTD website, nastd.org, for a link to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous videos. Once on the YouTube channel, we do ask that you hit the subscribe button to our channel so that we can qualify for a custom YouTube link in the future. So the topic for today's discussion is Azure Active Directory and its integration into our system. So this topic was brought to us by the folks at Microsoft, and it is such an important topic that we have 2 subject matter experts that we have helping us with this discussion. So first is Richard Antonow. Rich has been with Microsoft in the security space for 6 years. He is a security technical specialist, focusing specifically in the state and local government area with an emphasis on identity security. He has been communications, computer, and security focused for over 25 years. And like myself, is a retired Air Force veteran. Rich lives outside of Phoenix, Arizona, and enjoys outdoor water sports, boating, and running Tough Mudder Spartan events. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you.
And the question is that running as in organizing, or do you actually get out in the mud and run?
Oh no, I get out in the mud and run. I've got 10 Tough Mudders under my belt and 9 Spartans. I'm about to have this coming month. I'm about to have rotator cuff surgery, so I'm going to be out for a while. But my California team that I run with is actually already teeing up for the spring.
Nice, nice, nice. Yeah, I always envy those people. I wish I had gotten into that when I was younger. Right now, my body's a little too beat up and old, but hey.
I suspect I didn't play in the mud enough as a young child, but we'll leave it there.
All right. And also joining us today is Marvin D'Souza. Marvin is a technical specialist at Microsoft, focusing on modern workplace security. He has been in the industry for about 20 years, focusing on network security and operations. And prior to Microsoft, he worked at Cisco and Palo Alto Networks. Marvin lives in Kansas with his wife and 4 boys who keep him busy, I'm sure they do, with sports and an assortment of outdoor activities. So welcome, Marvin.
Thank you, Brad. Appreciate it.
What sports do we have? What do we got?
Well, for sports, we can do everything, right? I mean, like there's football, cross country, track, basketball, soccer, and some of the practices sometimes are 2 a week. So besides school drop off and pick up, I feel like a chauffeur in the evening. So it's just like picking people up, dropping them off, bringing them back home.
Yeah, I feel you. I feel you. I have 2 sons myself, but I also had my 2 nephews that we took in for about 5 years during their high school years. So 4 boys, yeah, 2 from Brazil, 2 from America, and running around between soccer and football fields and Boy Scouts and stuff like that. I don't miss it. I don't miss it.
Love summer more than they do.
All right. So let's get into the topic at hand. And this one, I will tell you, I do these, and a lot of them are subjects which all of them I'm interested in. All of them I love to learn about. But this one in particular is something that I'm really interested in the topic at hand, and hoping to learn a lot more. We've got some stuff going on right now. I am in the process of I'm going to be rolling out a new contact center in the very near future, and integrating hopefully with Active Directory and getting that so that it's seamless for people logging in and getting into the system, and also entering things. So I think I'm going to get a lot out of this. So let's go. So the first question: what is Azure Active Directory, and what is it used for?
All right, I'll start out with this one. Thank you, Brad. Active Directory is the typical Microsoft on-premises identity source. The vast majority of our customers are leveraging Active Directory. Azure Active Directory is our cloud-based identity solution and access management. It is an identity specifically to support not only cloud-based resources such as Office 365, federated apps, SaaS apps, but also on-prem apps through single sign-on. Typically, an organization gets to Azure Active Directory through installing a product called AD Connect, and that is a synchronization topology. So picture an organization hires a new individual. They will typically, right now today, they'll get added to the on-prem Active Directory, and they may get access to resources from there. Through AD Connect, that user object, as well as any groups they might be a member of, will automatically get synchronized up into Azure. And therefore, they can now leverage that for things like Office 365 and access to other technologies, including a lot of security capabilities that we'll talk about a little bit later.
Yeah, and just one thing, it's I think just to double click on something Rich mentioned, is a lot of times there's a misunderstanding when you mention the cloud or Azure Active Directory, and people get nervous and think, oh, everything I've built on premises has to go away. And just to double click on what Rich meant with Azure AD Connect, it's the ability for you to leverage all the work you've done and just bring it to the cloud. So you don't have to redo everything, redo all the accounts, etc. It's just that it's simple. It's an easy button to move your existing directory to the cloud. So thanks, Rich. That was good.
Okay. So when we talk about Azure AD integration, what does that mean?
Again, we all have a different concept of what integration might mean, because it has to be taken in context. Integration with what? So we're going to answer it kind of with integration with what our customers typically have today, which would be an on-prem Active Directory, which is also typically applications that are on-premise, and probably even services such as think of like VPN and so on to support your mobile users. With Azure Active Directory, once you've implemented, it's actually quite simple to do. Once you've implemented Azure Active Directory and the synchronization topology, users, when they log in using their Azure credentials, now not only do they get access to the O365's federated SaaS apps, but because the identity starts on-prem and is provisioned up into Azure, there is that Azure object has single sign-on back to there. So any application that the user already has access to, they can get back into there. And there are other capabilities within Azure. In this case, the name is called Application Proxy, that an organization can publish applications that are on-premise and make them available for users outside the bounds of your network, which is really, really handy in today's environment where we have to call it what it is. Organizations have had to transition to support a mobile workforce, either wholly or substantially. So that gives you that capability to leapfrog into there.
Okay, and is that connectivity without the need of like VPN or anything like that?
Sure. The answer with app proxy, that is correct. It would not require, does not require VPN. It can be done securely, can even trigger things like multi-factor authentication and what we call conditional access policies. Just quickly, what does that mean? Conditional access policy is a rules-based policy that, say, an organization sets up saying, hey, if I'm going to allow an organization or a user of an organization to access a particular application, I'm going to set the policy so that it has to be done from a mobile device that is being managed by our organization and not a personal device. Hence the conditional. The policy automatically, with no human intervention, once the policy is set up, it will evaluate what that connectivity is, who's logging on, whether they've done MFA, what device they're doing, what type of browser, what security protocols are on it. To the second part of the question you asked is, App Proxy was not designed specifically to replace VPN. So for instance, if you have applications that are client server that have to directly talk, you may still need VPN. However, we find the vast majority of our customers, 80+%, and Marvin, if you have any better number, 80+% of the organizations are able to publish apps and reduce the need for VPN.
Yeah, I think VPNs, come with their own baggage and their own issues, and there's a bottleneck bandwidth, things like that. Then you got a hairpin traffic back and forth. Sometimes if VPN is not designed correctly, you give someone access to the entire internal network. So a lot of organizations are trying to not necessarily move away from it, but trying to limit what people need when they need it. So I would agree with that. It's as you need basis. We're not saying VPN's gone or never going to be used. It's just if you can, give someone access to an application without the need for complicating it, improve customer experience while being secure, why not?
Okay. So what are the benefits of Azure AD integration, and what does it either replace or supplement that we have in place today?
Sure. By far, the primary benefit of Azure Active Directory is it disjoins that requirement for user identities and user devices to be on-prem and or be authenticated by on-prem resources. Those of you in the networking world, I'm talking Azure Active Directory domain controllers, right? Okay. That going back to the VPN, a lot of times organizations will dictate that you have to use VPN because in order, without Azure, you have to log in and be able to be authenticated by a domain controller, and the only way to get there is through VPN. So by moving to a synchronized cloud-based account, that disjoins the need for the dependency for the on-prem. And what does that do? That sets up perfectly an organization to be able to support the requirements of today's world, with hybrid environments, on-prem and cloud, and the remote workforce. It makes it so much easier. A couple of interesting statistics. Microsoft Azure has over 160 Azure data centers that cover multiple different formats, meaning there's a commercial Azure data center format. There is a government. There's a government high, aka federal. There are sovereign ones for different countries, Australia, China, so on, that have their own unique data restrictions and so on. Check this out. Microsoft even has data centers underwater. Yes, that's true. Go ahead and look it up. We have data centers underwater. Why? Because what's the main cost for a data center? Heat reduction, right? It's not the power of the servers. It's removing all the heat from all the servers. Well, guess what? Underwater works perfect that way. So yeah, we actually have those.
Yeah. I just like to add to that is always on, always available. That's a key thing. A lot of organizations struggle with hiring enough people, enough resources, enough data centers. In the old days, we'd have multiple data centers and we want to make sure they were a certain distance apart. So in different power circuits, et cetera, we take all that trouble away from you. And just like Rich mentioned, right? So the conditional access, one of the key benefits we're seeing with this is our intelligence that is made actionable for you. So think about it. Microsoft ingests 24 trillion signals on a daily basis. That's 24 trillion signals from our consumer side, enterprise side, government side, commercial side, and from our partners. and then we make that actionable for you. So in live, when the conditional access is actually, monitoring an access event and evaluating whether someone should or should not have access, in real time, you can say, oh, Rich Antonello or Marvin D'Souza's risk level is high enough. Maybe we should not give him access. Maybe we should force him to do a password reset. So that's that, moving away from the traditional manual way of doing things to a more intelligent, automated way. And there's no need for you to go full automation. You can go, crawl, walk around, just report things. You don't have to go, oh my gosh, I got to automate everything. I'm scared of that. Well, you can just say, just report and just let me know if Marvin and Rich are, causing too much risk issues. So.
Okay. So, this technology is obviously not new. It sounds like it's just a new way of doing the Active Directory, but what changes, what are some of the changes that have happened in the technology in the past couple of years?
I'm going to answer that slightly different. It's less about the changes in the technology. It's actually more about what has changed in our work world that is now leveraging this. So for instance, we all have to admit, what is the major change over the last, say, 2 years? That's right, COVID. And what did that do? It's not about COVID. It's what it did to our work environment. Personally, Marvin and I, because we're both in the government, state and local government workspace, we have had a lot of organizations that were either what we would call cloud averse. They really didn't want to move to the cloud, or just had been slow, not first in adopting that. So maybe they're on the journey, but they weren't there yet. Yeah. They were quite literally these organizations that hadn't taken advantage of that. When COVID hit and everybody was forced to work remotely, now all of a sudden those organizations had to quickly adopt, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? Azure actually made that capability much, much simpler for them. It didn't require them to throw away everything they had. As I stated early on, all you have to do is connect. You sign up for an Azure tenant with a unique Azure tenant name. You implement AD Connect. You synchronize your user and group objects up there, and then you define your policies. And of course, based on what licensing you buy, the other capabilities that you want, such as like multi-factor authentication, or if you want advanced risk protection, or if you want to go all in on the whole security suite, which is our Microsoft 365 and the Defender series. Depending upon an organization, what they're going to do, like Marvin said, crawl, walk, run. Those technologies, Brad, as you said, they're not new. They keep evolving. They keep adding. They've been there, but organizations have just been kind of slow to adopt. And again, I'm going to call it what it is, kind of out of fear of, I don't want to put my stuff in the cloud. It is very, very secure. We humans, the ones that set the policies, are the ones that kind of make it insecure. We have so many customers that they just fail to do basic stuff like enable MFA. It's part of your capabilities that are provided with Azure. Something as simple as enabling MFA. You miss that, you just allowed an entry threat point. So, I think that's the main thing. It's not so much the technology, it's the organizations that had to adopt to the technology.
Yeah, and to that, I want to just add, a lot of our innovation is getting feedback from customers from different, yourself, Brad, or agencies, think tanks. And what we hear a lot of is we gave someone access to do something and then we forgot and we left them there. So we have things like privileged identity management, and with conditional access as authorization management. We have a lot of tools that help you with access review. So you can go back and say, well, why does Rich have access to our, X portal or X resources when he finished the contract 6 months ago? So you can have expiration dates on certain things. You can have certain kinds of reviews. We have a B2C kind of model where you can actually have one-to-many kind of resource, right? So you have, let's say, all the constituents in a certain township or the DMV or something, and we can control access to that, make it easy for you. It's an easy button. B2B, so collaborations of multiple agencies who want to share resources, whether it's a SharePoint site or an application or other resources. We can just provide access, time that access, give business owners the ability to choose who to get access to or not. Rich is one of our experts with B2C, and so we call on him a lot. So maybe Rich, you want to just add a couple on B2C thing?
And you bring up a great point. I probably could have covered that on the previous topic of the technologies. That is something that continues to evolve quite rapidly. When I started out and said that you're typically an organization is on-prem synchronized to Azure, well, that's great. But another common use case we find, Brad, is organizations in the state and local government, they'll have like a major tenant, but there are a lot of other organizations like the airport that because of federal regulations, they don't allow them to join that tenant. They have to have their own. And yet the main shared tenant, they have certain applications that those airport users, employees need to get to. Part of what Azure brings to the table is not just the synchronized users, but also as Marvin was talking about, a B2B, a business to business. You can invite members from that organization to access specific applications within your organization, leverage all the security tools, thinking the MFAs, the conditional access, the access reviews, and automate all of those. And then one step further, we also have for city state, picture you have, now it's not about the employees, now it's about the citizens. We want to license, we want to make it easy so that all the constituents in our city, state, township can renew their licenses, pay a traffic ticket, things of that nature. You can set it up very easily through the B2C capabilities, business to consumer, constituent, customer, whatever you want the C to mean, to make it available for those users simply, all from your Azure without having to extend that out.
Okay. So you've touched on a few of them, but what other use cases are there for using integration with Azure AD?
A couple of the primary use case obviously is to support the remote users. These use cases that I just talked about are very, very relevant to the customers that we're speaking to today, right? In that without something like Azure Active Directory, you would be supporting your employees through an on-prem, then maybe you've got a website that you have to manage. A lot of times it's through some SQL database of all the users and individuals and organizations sign up, and you've got capacity, you've even got licensing for SQL. All those things are all part of the identity. But the real big use case and the real big factor comes down to the integration. Once users start using an Azure credential, Office 365, federated apps, SaaS apps, let's pick on something like Salesforce. Right now, today, if you didn't have something like Azure Active Directory and you as an organization are going to leverage an application such as Salesforce that is cloud-based, what do they have to do? You're creating, your IT department is creating an on-prem Active Directory account for your users so they can get to your internal applications and your HR and so on. Then they have to provision a user object in Salesforce. The user now has to have two different accounts that even if they have the exact same name, they're two different accounts. Passwords aren't synchronized. So now what's going to happen, your users are going to put them on a sticky note or something. So it all weighs together. The more you can leverage that common identity. And then the big factor, as Marvin alluded to, is we put a massive amount of compute power and AI against all the logins and all the application access, and we provide that information back to your tenant and to the products, the Defender products and the Azure products that all share those signals. So if something happens, if a user normally is logging in here from where I live in Arizona, now all of a sudden tomorrow morning or tonight at 11:30 p.m., they start logging in from Uzbekistan. Without the IT organization have to get out, get their coffee cup in the morning, start looking through logs, those policies, that threat analytics already light up policies that are in place for conditional access already address that, increase the threat risk for that particular logon for that particular user, and put the announcements. So one, that user can be automatically prevented from accessing resources that they shouldn't access because of the enhanced threat risk. So I can go into this for hours. Obviously, we don't have the time for that, but there's a ton of stuff in there.
He's right. There is a ton of stuff. I mean, like just talking about conditional access and all the different things and how it makes your life easier. But I just want to touch on the make your life easier, right? So it's not just about improving the life of the administrator where it's always on, always available, better security, but also the customer experience, your end users. If you want to start attracting new talent, if you want to start hiring people who are growing up in a world where remote access is just a bailiwick, like a staple, it's no longer something special. It's I can access anything from anywhere, which is why the cloud is so popular, is because you can move so fast, but you want to be able to do it in a secure fashion. So what Rich was pointing out earlier with his phone is we have the ability to do things like control what kind of access you get when you do get access. And that's all, it's all condition based, right? So it's this customer experience where we don't annoy you with security, but at the same time allow you to do your job in a secure fashion within the principles of the organization, depending on what you're trying to do. So it's customer experience as well as your administrators, right? You don't want to work them so hard. Like he said, the coffee mug in the morning, we've all been there, right? You're exhausted, you're tired. And as a human being, you make mistakes. Machines don't sleep, they don't take vacations. It's just, that's the whole point of it, right? So that's the key.
And they don't like coffee.
Exactly.
Actually spilled on them.
They have a ton of money on coffee.
And just something you touched on, Rich, you mentioned Uzbekistan. Now, again, I don't know if we would necessarily want to do this, but I'm assuming that there is also rules that we can put in place to say we're not going to allow logins from specific locations around the world, whether it be Uzbekistan or someplace else.
That is correct. As a matter of fact, Marvin and I were typically on the pre-sales side. We kind of dabble a little bit into helping our customers kind of get started. And I admit one of the first things I do with my customers is show them how to properly and efficiently implement an MFA policy and set the block rules for out of country. You know, hey, do you support, remote workers out of country? You can even pick and choose out of the 256 countries. You can choose which ones you want to trigger and so on.
Yeah. Okay. So you've given me a lot of good, challenges that can be solved with Active Directory integration. Are there any problems that it can present?
Problems. Well, the problems that we see typically have to do with the initial planning stages, right? Up to things like which type of Azure platform does your organization require? Commercial or government, based on the restrictions you have. A huge one has to do with during your planning process, what type of applications are you supporting? Will you need to continue supporting? Primarily what I'm talking about, applications you have today that are on-prem that you need to support. What authentication do they support? Yeah. Are they legacy authentication based? Are they Azure, or are they Active Directory integrated based? Do they have their own database? So those can be supported, and depending upon how they need to support it has everything to do with how you choose to implement certain policies. Even down to, hey, will these legacy ones support a certain level of authentication and so on. Marvin, anything I'm missing?
Yeah, sometimes I think it's just fear of the unknown. So I think the biggest challenge is a lot of times the struggle is either leadership or on the technical side, technical team. Maybe, people are just think it's going to be really difficult when we speak about automation or the ability to code or automate things with scripting and things like that. They think they're going to have to learn a new skill set. It's going to be so difficult for them. And we see automating, a lot of times people think, oh, we're going to automate them out of a job, or if you don't have a data center on-prem, you don't need technical people. So there's a lot of like misconceptions there where no, it's the same thing. We need a lot of people still to do the work. There's never enough resources, as we know, especially in the cybersecurity world. It's just like the unknown, right? It's fear that all my stuff's available to anyone. Microsoft shares my data with other tenants. There's just like some fear. Those challenges, I think, are the biggest ones that people say, well, I'm just not going to go to the cloud. And so that's what we see a lot as well in the state and local agencies, is that fear and political, just apprehension of moving ahead.
Right. And realize that we have very, very large customers. You look at like a federal customer, United States Air Force, 1.2 million customers functioning through Azure in the cloud. I can't go into any more depth about that, but I mean, we're supporting huge customers. There are no restrictions, unlike now today with your Active Directory. As you get to certain levels, you start adding more users. You've got to consider things like hardware. Oh, I got to add more domain controllers. Oh, we're opening a new office over here. Oh, I got to put a domain controller. What about network paths and so on? You don't have any of those you have to deal with when you move to the cloud data center. We are doing all of that on your behalf and everybody else's behalf, and yet all your data is isolated to you. And by the way, anytime you've heard any of us talking about Microsoft provides, what we're saying is that the tool sets, the capabilities that we're providing to you, we don't have access to your data.
Nothing.
We can't access your tenant. We can't access your data, anything like that. Once you sign up and start putting your objects in there, we can't do anything.
Even Microsoft support cannot access it unless you specifically create a ticket, and that's timed, and they can only see certain things. They can't see the data. All your data is always encrypted. You can double encrypt your data. There's
private key and Azure Key Vault and customer lockbox. Yep. All these things allow an organization, again, back to the fear of, hey, I'm giving Microsoft my data. No, this would be the same thing as saying we're paying for a second data center in case there's a DR strategy, but I need to provide security for that other data center. It's like you're putting your data in there. You're doing the same thing. We're hosting those capabilities. The data belongs to you and the access is to you.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So you've convinced me. I'm all in. I'm ready to go. So what do I need to consider? What do I need to do to get planning and get started with this integration process?
Excellent. So a couple of things. One, any of the technologies we're talking about, for those organizations who are not ready to go all in and actually say, I'm going to go do this yet, we do offer trials. The trials are always free, gives you the ability to link that. I'm going to say that so many times when I've had customers that have opted into a trial and then start getting the signals and actually see what's truly going on in their organization, you can't unsee some of that. It's like, wait, this was going on. It's going on every day. We just don't know it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is if you're security focused, right? What you don't see will hurt you. As to the, yeah. So obviously, Microsoft hat on. We would love to, any organization that is interested and wants to be able to take advantage, one of the things we would want to do is have that initial discussion with the customer, because as part of the planning, there's a lot of those questions we need to ask. In good faith, we don't want you to buy tool sets that you're not ready to implement. It doesn't help us, doesn't help you. I know it helps us. Yay, we sold something. But if we did that, what's going to happen is they won't implement it because they don't have time or so on. Their licenses will ultimately expire without being used. They're not going to be happy with us. They're not going to get the advantage of it. So we don't want that. We want to make sure that we have an opportunity to talk with the customers and make sure they're getting what they need at the appropriate time. We also, as part of the implementation, once you acquire certain services, we have things like ours is called Fast Track to help organizations, specifically like with Active Directory, get that AD Connect set up and the appropriate synchronization, and whether or not they want to do password sync or leave the passwords on-prem and do pass-through authentication, enabling MFA. We want to do that. Or maybe the customer, the particular customer we're talking to, they just don't have the manpower to be able to implement this. We can help them by pointing them to a partner.
Right? Okay, so
I think you covered it all, Rich. It's just like the planning part is key, right? That's where Rich and I come in, and we meet with customers, we show them all the art of the possible, as we call it. So sometimes we just show you the whole portfolio, and we ask a lot of questions like, what are the biggest problems you have right now? What are the biggest challenges you have right now? Where are you guys at? Try to meet you where you're at and tell you like, hey, this is a low hanging fruit. And we have dashboards like Rich was talking about earlier. Like, so we show you where you can get them, it's the Pareto principle kind of thing, 20% of the work to get 80% of the gain. So MFA, like Rich was talking about, and the reason he mentioned it so many times is just by adding that, you improve your security score so much by like leaps and bounds, right? And then you add conditional access policies. And so that's where we come in and we help you with that. So you can start going from an organization that has very little security to now being very security aware. And the dashboard will constantly give you updates to where you are, what you're doing. And the trial he mentioned is key. I think it's a nice thing to get your feet wet also and just see like, what does it look like? How intuitive is the dashboard, is the tool? Because we can say it's nice and intuitive, but you should see it for yourself.
All right. Are there any limitations or restrictions that I should be aware of, before I start my journey?
Very few. Typically, the limitations are more on the organization itself. Unfortunately, in our realm, state, local government, again, I'm going to be open and honest. The limitations typically have more to do with the governmental regulations within a city state organization, where you've got, say, a main IT organization and you have other organizations where they each have their own current Active Directories and maybe they don't play nice in the sandbox. Azure itself has very few limitations. It really does come back to the planning again, Brad. That's why that is what, like Marvin said, that is part of our job, is to work with the customers and know the right questions to ask to help them find out if there are, that way we can set the appropriate expectation. Hey, because you point out that you have these certain type of apps that currently support legacy authentication, they're not going to take advantage of SAML. So therefore we keep saying single sign-on, seamless integration. That particular app, because of the app itself, you wouldn't get that. So we want to make sure we set the appropriate expectations for the organization to take that forward. But as far as limitation, no. And the last thing I'll add, because I know we're running out of time, is when you look at deploying something like Azure Active Directory, I want to be very clear, it does not take the place of your on-prem AD. If at some point in the future you just decide you want to completely walk away from an on-prem AD, that can be done, but that's not what Azure AD is. Azure AD is a way to extend that to the Azure cloud and give you those capabilities while still taking benefit of everything you've invested in your on-prem. You can de-emphasize that, and one thing you could do right away, a huge gain, maybe you do have an alternate data center, get rid of it. You can actually look at hosting those services in Azure, because Azure isn't just an identity source. It can also host workloads, including things like domain controllers and so on. This is where individuals like Marvin and I can come in to help you figure out what are your goals, what do you need to do.
To help you save some money in the process.
By the way, we make money. I'm not going to kid.
So I do have to ask this question. My organization thought so much about security that they put it in our name. So are there any security concerns with integrating accounts with Azure AD?
So I will start out by again emphasizing that we have monstrously huge federal organizations like the Air Force and NASA and various other ones leveraging Azure Active Directory. Most of we don't mention customers by name unless they allow us to. Most of the major city states are leveraging Active Directory. Security-wise, highly secure. You can enhance security, the monitoring, the threat analytics, depending upon the licensing you choose. For instance, just Azure Active Directory has quite a bit of security built in, but then let's say as an organization, you're going, we're not doing device management and security for our devices. Can we do that? Yeah, absolutely. That's actually all already built into the Azure cloud, and you enable that. I call turning it on by enabling the license. You purchase an appropriate license that covers device management, and then the service lights up in there. You turn on the features that you want. You set the policies like the conditional access, like the compliance policies, and then you onboard the devices for your users, and it enhances your security. The more you secure your devices, your applications, your data, MFA one more time, some of the basic stuff.
Yep. And Azure is a security platform, right? So we're moving away from siloed security products, which we ended up with a fragmented security architecture, where I bought this piece of equipment from, it's like, think about it, if you bought a car, you'd never go and buy the transmission from Ford and the body from Dodge. And that you wouldn't do that. You'd want one place to go buy a car. So you go one place for the warranty, but everything works together. Everything was designed to work together. So what we call is natively integrated within Azure. So like Rick was pointing out, when you integrate with Azure, we take in signals from multiple sources to tell you every security login event. That means every login event, how secure it is. So like he said, we're looking at the device. We're looking at the user. We're looking at the resource he's trying to connect to. Look at the location he's coming from, the IP address. We're taking all those 40 or 80 gigs of data per login event is being, ingested by machine learning and AI. Then when you actually synchronize your on-prem to the cloud, if we see some red flags within some accounts, we're like, oh, hey, we see your admin is also, compromised. We're seeing his name on a wall of sheep somewhere on the dark web. You're seeing kind of crazy things from users who are logging in from multiple countries, impossible travel. So, and like Rich was saying, it's quite the opposite. It's actually going to make things more secure. And everything is TLS 1.2 secure, encrypted. Like he mentioned earlier, you're in your own environment. There's no, just because you're all in Azure, we one big happy family. We can just walk into each other.
Between accounts in there.
Exactly. There's a lot of safety and protocols in place that you can't. You're actually more secure than you've probably been in one of the best data centers you could spend money building. So.
Okay, so this is normally where I ask about what things cost and like that. I know this is a little bit different because it's kind of inside of other things. But what would I need to do? You had mentioned it a few minutes ago. You need specific licensing. What software licenses do I need, or what is there any hardware that I would need to procure, or how does this work?
Sure. So like you said, because each organization cost is always how many of these do you need? How many are you supporting? What services did you want? So the cost we certainly couldn't answer on here, but your direct question here we can. So for instance, Azure itself is already built into the cloud. So do I need hardware? The only hardware potentially you may need, because you can do it virtual if you wish, is that device, that service called AD Connect, which is a server on-prem that does the gathering synchronization from your on-prem AD, pushes it up into the cloud. It can be virtual, so you can even do away with hardware on there. As far as hardware, none other is required. Everything that we've talked about is already up in the cloud. Typically, the licensing is on a per user. So if you've got 10,000 users, employees in your environment, and you're going to provide them that same level of capability, you'd be buying licenses for those users. What license do I need? That's where Marvin and I again come into, because we want to make sure we understand what type of capabilities are you trying to provide for your users? What level of security, what functions do you need? Because there's a massive amount that come as the core Azure Active Directory premium type capability. But then if you say, okay, we also want to be able to manage the devices. Well, that could be its own separate license, but what we typically find is when organizations say, we want this license and this license, by the time you pay for 2 licenses, we could have got you that next license that combines all of those plus others together into, say, an EMS license. So it's really important for us to understand what the factor is. As a typical example, Brad, the device management, back to this again. Any user that you acquire a device license for, that user, you can manage up to 15 devices for that one user. So think they can have an iPhone, a pad, a tablet, a laptop, even their desktop, all under the same license. So once you've bought that, we're not piecemealing you to death and so on. They can keep adding devices. I'm hoping nobody does. I don't know any organization that allows you up to 15. You can restrict it down, but licensing wise, you're not going to add any more.
Yes,
Just counting the devices on my desk right now, so I don't have to.
Even though it's a demo, I have 7, and I'm going like, I'm kind of a wild card out there. And oh, one last thing, and I'll give to. In case you hadn't noticed, we are not Microsoft only. We support Linux, we support Apple, we support Macintosh, we support Android, we support Android for work, we support for single sign-on, we support multi-cloud. I am talking, you can have accounts in Google Cloud and Amazon Web Services. All of those will integrate with your Azure services.
Okay. All right. So believe it or not, we've gotten to the end. I told you this would be relatively painless. My last question that I like to ask every time is, what else do I need to know? What did I forget to ask you?
Marvin, you want to, anything you can think of?
Well, I think from an Azure Active Directory, I think, Brad, you asked a lot of good questions. You kind of, but I would just say there's a lot of products out there within the Azure cloud world that can help your organization become more secure, more cloud agile, if you will. So, Rich just mentioned workloads in multiple places. I mean, Azure AD accounts in multiple places integrating. We also support workloads and protect workloads. If, let's say, you have an agency that had some workloads in AWS, something in GCP, something on-prem, where Microsoft security or Azure security is not about, all right, get rid of everything and it has to be everything in a Microsoft world. Like Rich pointed out, we support Linux. We can support Linux in AWS or in GCP, on-prem, Windows. We can provide security, visibility, and stretch that control plane, if you will. So now your governance rules, your policy rules, your regulation, all those things that you are using in Azure, you can stretch that to other places. So you get visibility and control from one dashboard to multiple places, which is kind of like the holy grail of IT, which we've been always looking for. I mean, like, how do I take what's in this data center and replicate it? Well, I'm going to have to spend 3 years doing that. We can help with that transition really well. So that's one thing. It doesn't stop at just Active Directory. There's a lot there. And individuals like myself, Rich, that's what we're here for, is to just ask questions where you are on your journey and then give you that information and it's to help you out there. So
well said.
Thank you.
Excellent. All right, so we've done that the whole session here, and once again I find myself like at the end of these going, I learned so much today. Good information that I'll put to use very soon, trust me. Thank you, gentlemen, both very much for your time, for the good information. A reminder to our viewers that if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We're trying to get over 100 subscribers so that we can get NASTD in our YouTube channel name and not some set of code that nobody could ever remember. And if you have any ideas for future sessions, please reach out to me, Brad Steele, at brad.steele@mass.gov. Thank you again to Microsoft and Marvin D'Souza, Technical Specialist, and Rich Antonow, Security Technical Specialist. Thank you both for your time today.
Thank you, Brad.
All right, thank you. And stop recording.